So Edmund Ironside turns up at Ashingdon on October the 18th, 1016, over 1,000 years ago, and actually fancies his chances. Because 2 miles to the east, over there somewhere, King Canute's tied up. He's tied up between the rivers Crouch and the River Roach. Not only that, but Canute's army is much smaller. They're a considerably smaller contingent, the Danes, and they have to face a choice. Either a very difficult battle against the English, the Saxons, or return home empty-handed. The events of the battle, though, play out much more like an episode of Game of Thrones. Those Danes are always known for being a tricky bunch, and so it proves. As so often, fact, history, proves more eventful than fiction. Before dawn, Canute's forces formed up and began pushing forward out from a point where Ashingdon Hill was visible from a small woodland. Or so it would have been had it not been for such low visibility. Weather plays a part, as so often it does in the history of England. In the distance, the English forces are split into two groups. One led by Edmund Ironside, the king. The other group led by a man named Edric Streona. As the Danes neared the bottom of the hill in what we might expect would have been a wedge formation, Ironside led a charge down a relatively small incline towards the advancing Danish shield wall. Now remember that weather. It's foggy. We can't see what's going on. Therefore, as King Egmund and his men charged, they failed to realise that the other division, led by Edric Streona, hasn't moved. In fact, worse than not moving, they're actually turning their backs. The vital support that Edmund Ironside was counting on is not going to materialise. Now, Streona is mentioned in Saxon literature as being a traitor, the sort of weasel character that you wouldn't find out of place in literature or a TV programme. The sort of man who'd maybe deliberately give bad advice to a king, or maybe even take bribes from the other side, looking out for himself, not looking out for what's best for his king and his country. With half the men Ironside thought he had, the Saxons were decimated by the Danes. A fighting rearguard managed to get Edmund out of the fight, and were initially pursued down the road to a hamlet on a river crossing known as Battle's Bridge. Possibly that's where the name comes from, just near Hullbridge. Where some English warriors gave enough time, bravely, costing their lives, to make good the king's escape. Edmund's goal, no doubt, was to at least attempt to return to Wessex to raise another army. Despite winning a clear victory, Canute was still wary of thinning his ranks further. He recognised, because let's face it, Canute was a very, very bright and clever leader. He recognised that although they'd won the battle, he didn't necessarily have enough to consolidate his position. So therefore, the English, who were once again feeling under immense pressure, also wanted to end hostilities as soon as possible. So with both sides favouring at least temporary peace, Ironside and Canute met on Olney Island in the River Severn and came to terms which effectively split England in two between the Danish east and the Saxon west. This split was to prove so significant because unfortunately, in what might have been either a case of poisoning or from understandable exhaustion, just a few weeks later, Edmund Ironside died, leaving King Canute as the sole leader of the English nation. The defeat of the Saxons here at Ashingdon began decades of political instability, which inevitably led to invasion of England. In 1066, not only by William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard, as he was known at the time, but a month earlier than William, the Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, at Stamford. The various treaties, marriages and agreements between the various houses of nobility had led to a situation where various factions felt they had a legitimate claim to the throne of England. Whilst we'll never know what might have happened in history had Ironside won here at Ashingdon, there's the distinct possibility that the entire character of England would be totally different today. Had the Saxons not endured decades of instability, the entire Norman French influence on England and the British Empire might not have existed. Had England kept its more Scandinavian, Germanic cultural attributes, perhaps the entire world would be a very different place than what it is today. So here, on a sleepy October morning in Ashingdon, just a few miles down from our school, less than a mile actually, 1.6 miles down from our school, is the church which remembers the Battle of Ashingdon.